This video grows out of my research on peasant movements in La Convencion Valley in 1964-1965. One of the interesting events that took place within about 2 weeks after we arrived in the valley was a knock on the door, and a fellow dressed in his suit asked me to accompany him down to an office there in the middle of town, and didn't really tell me much about what was going on. He said he'd like me to go with him. So I went with him, and turns out that he was a policeman, intelligence, representative of the Peruvian Intelligence Police, equivalent to the FBI in the United States. And in this office, where there were 2 or 3 men when I entered with him, I was informed that, and they understood that I was, I don't know where they got the information from, but they had acquired the information that I was there to do a study of the valley and the peasants and the breakaway of the peasants from the hacendados, and that they would like to have me give a report to them every week about what I found out in my study. And they weren't requesting, they were telling me that this was what I was going to do. Well, that was a real challenge, because it's an attempt to co-opt me into their intelligence network, and I have nothing that I'm interested in sharing with them, and certainly not going to be involved with them, because if I do, it would be a betrayal of trust to the other people with whom from whom I would be getting information, the campesinos, for example. And I wasn't about to do that. However, the implications were there that if I didn't cooperate with them and provide them with this information, I could be escorted from the valley. Now, these, I don't recall them specifics saying they would do this, but these were the implications. I could be kicked out of the country for not cooperating with the local the governmental intelligence police service. So this is a real quandary I'm in at this moment in time. It would jeopardize, obviously, my research, being honest with all parties in the area. And so I said, no, I was not willing to do that. I would be very happy to provide them with the information that I would secure at the end of my study, which would be published, and I would send them a copy of that published information. They weren't happy. And so, for the next month at least, and probably several months, I, with some anxiety, awaited another knock on our door, telling me whatever, because the implications were that if I didn't cooperate, some problems could arise for our family, for us being in the valley. But nothing happened. That was the one and only attempt on their part to co-opt me into their intelligence network and provide them information. Very big challenge, and a lot of anxiety produced by that at the outset. But we stayed, and was able to carry out the research. Another event of note was an invitation by a small group of bank managers. There were 4 or 5 of them in this small little valley who would loan money to the campesinos or buy coffee from them, as well as probably from the hacendados, but they were there representing their banks to get these transactions made. Well, they invited me to meet with them in an informal meeting held in a bar there in the middle of town. And so they were another group that I needed information from. They had an important role in terms of what took place in La Convencion Valley with regard to the peasants of the campesinos who lived there. And so I attended and went into this little bar and sat down with them. They asked me if I'd have a drink with them, and I indicated I'd have a soft drink, and they kind of looked at each other. And then one of the participants there, one of the managers, began to pressure me. He said they were having beer. Would I have a beer with them? And I said, no, thank you. That explained it for personal, religious reasons. That wouldn't be comfortable for me. Well, he didn't give up. He kept pressuring me. It became very uncomfortable. And the others finally kind of quieted him down. And we proceeded, and they asked me about what I was doing, and just getting information might be useful to them, and I was happy to provide them purposes of being there. And that concluded that meeting with the bank managers. However, about a month later, when it was getting to the critical point of my research and being able to get the cooperation of the peasants, the campesinos, especially the organization, there was a large valley-wide connection of sindicatos, labor organizations that had organized together. And the leaders of this organization, led by a man whose name was Manuel Concha, he was the president of this association. I had wanted to meet with them to get their permission to apply a questionnaire to the different chapters, the different groups that were organized throughout the valley. So it was very critical to my research effort, the success of it, central. And through the help of one of my fellow who assisted me, Pancho Cavero, who was helping me arrange these meetings and helping me in a number of ways that were useful in my research, arrangements were made for me to meet with them, with the leaders of the sindicatos of the different towns, areas throughout the valley. This is a view of the sindicatos marching through downtown Quillabamba. And so a meeting was held again in a bar. That's typically where most business was taken care of. And I walked in, and they were sitting around drinking, and asked me if I would have a beer with them. Now, I'm going to insert something here which is fairly important to be aware of. Several years before, I had talked with a member of the Cornell, Peru project at Vicos, one of the anthropologists who had lived in Peru, who had done studies in the Callejón de Huaylas, in that area where the Vicos project was carried out. And he told me, he said, you will have to drink when you are in Peru, in the rural areas, because all business is carried out through drinking, with drinking. And if you turn them down, they'll probably have nothing to do with you. Those were his words specifically. This was before I ever got to Peru. So they asked me if I would have a beer with them. Again, kind of like with the PIP, the future of my research rests on my answer. Well, it's just one beer. my answer is no thank you. Because of my religious principles, I will just have a soft drink. Silence. So that effort concluded that part. Was followed up by a request from the Presidente de los Sindicatos de Valle de la Convencion y Lares, of the sindicatos, peasant unions. The leader of them, the president, asked to meet with him privately. As I indicated, his name was Manuel Concha. So he and I met together in the middle of the Plaza de Armas, I think it's called, the Central Park of Quillabamba. Beautiful park area, big mango trees shading it. It was an evening when we met there, about 7 o'clock in the evening, sitting on a bench. And he and I, Manuel and I, talked for what must have been 2 or 3 hours. His asking me question after question after question, and my responding truthfully, as completely as I could, to any of the questions that he had. He not only probed my political views, my background, where I grew up, but my political views, what I was doing in this study that I was carrying out, my religious views, which was interesting. He had an interest in those. Asked me a lot of questions in that area. And at the conclusion of that meeting, I was told that the campesinos would cooperate with me in my study. Wow. One of the significant things that I found out through Manuel was that some of the leaders, the main leaders in that district-wide association, were evangelicals. That Manuel was an evangelical. Now this is curious because no indication previous to this time, even in the literature that I had read, was there any indication of non-Catholic leaders being in charge of these associations. In fact, rather it was generally assumed that they might have been Marxists because of the influence of Hugo Blanco, a Marxist who had helped in some of the organization which took place in the valley. But Protestant or evangelicals, no way. There had been no previous indication of that. So in that moment, Manuel and I became friends. And that was significant. And he told me at that time, the reason I'm mentioning this, is that when I had my interview with the leaders of the sindicatos, they had already known about my behavior with the bank managers, that I had refused to drink alcohol with them. They knew that. Where they got that information, I have no idea, but they were aware of that. And if my behavior had been any different with them in an attempt to get on the better side of them, to get their permission, if I had attempted to go against my own values, they were ready to deny me their cooperation. The consistency of me living my values in that valley did not result in the outcomes that the anthropologist from Cornell had told me would surface and would emerge, result from that, but just the opposite. I was respected because I did not change my principles to satisfy one side or the other, and I treated both equally and the same. That to me was a major life learning event, and significant. I would not betray the trust of what I believed. Okay. This is the first page of a 22-page chapter that appears in the book Latin American Peasant Movements. This gives a summation of my research and my findings in the valley that was published by Cornell University Press. If you'd like a copy of this, just send me an email, www.escr@gmail.com, and I'll send you a copy of this at no cost to you. Happy to be able to oblige in doing this.